Max Avery, and I've just arrived in Karangahake to interview Mr. John Cotter. It's the 13th of January 2004, and we're on the corner, appropriately enough, of John Cotter Road. So we'll take a look at John Cotter Road and the hand-carved sign on it, and then we'll take a look at Mr. Cotter's house and Mr. Cotter himself and his dog. That's the corner of Cotter Road up there, and this is Mr. Cotter's property. And there he is, sitting on the step of the little cottage, catching up with today's news.
Yes.
Afternoon, Mr. Cotter. Nice to be sitting here talking to you. Now, you've got a very long association with Karangahake. Any chance of you telling us something about that?
Yes, that won't be any problem, as I came here about 1923, and at that time I was going to primary school, and our family had shifted up from the King Country, from Kakahi, and Karangahake was then a waning gold mining town. The gold mining era had commenced right back in 1875. It was in 1875 that the Maori people gave permission for people to mine the area, and they had an opening at Town just north of Karangahake, and the area was declared open for mining. I think the date was March the 3rd, 1875. I think that's right. Anyway, there was a rush. There were hundreds of miners who had been waiting to get approval to go and stake their claims on the Karangahake Mountain or anywhere where they thought there might be gold here. And when the rush started, it was quite a hectic affair. They rushed across from Town up the mountain and pegged off places that they thought they'd make a successful claim. Unfortunately, that only happened to a few. There was a lot of quartz that wasn't payable, and when it was found, it wasn't workable to the ordinary prospector. Lots of claims were pegged out, hard work done to put in drives, sink winzes or whatever, but only in a few cases were they successful. And eventually they left to other areas, probably out Waihi way here or whatever to try the luck elsewhere. And after a few years, when most of them, the prospectors, had give up their claims or sold them to a couple of 3 mining companies who had the finance, Karangahake settled down to produce somewhat worthwhile mines. First, the Woodstock. It was set up at the confluence of the Awamutu and the Waihi River. I have a map here. That, as we go along, that'll give you some idea of what Karangahake was like. Not when it was first opened. When it was first opened up, that was all native bush, right down to river level. But when this map was taken about 1910 or 12 or something like that, really when Karangahake was at its heyday. But in the early days, all these hills were covered in bush. And one of the first things the miners had to do to get at the reefs or to produce ore was to clear that, and they done it mostly by firing it. It wasn't looked on then as anything. Today, if you done that, you'd be shot. But those days, that was common. You cleared the bush. And here it is, in the mining days. The Woodstock was a battery established right at the junction of the rivers, and it was one of the first. About the same time, though, the Crown Gold Mining Company, further up the river, it was established. Now, the Crown Company had to bring the ore right down the valley and to a treatment plant they set up here at the foot of what we call the Crown Hill. The Woodstock brought theirs down till they got to where they'd set their battery up at the junction of the rivers, and their ore went across the river through the plant, but it was never successful. Karangahake ore was very hard. The bullion was very hard to extract from the ore. The gold was extremely fine, and by using the ordinary methods that were common at that time, that was to crush the ore and wash the concentrates from it, either by putting it over Wilford's table or any other way. They used to crush it, take the concentrates, that was all the gold and silver and minerals, and extract the gold from the concentrates by using mercury quicksilver, and a process that was commonly used right down the Coromandel. But when they tried to use that system here, they lost half or more than half of it went down the river. It just didn't work. The result was all the small companies failed. Woodstock failed, and they sold out to the Talisman Company, who in turn built a great big treatment plant there, and that's it. Now their ore, instead of coming down the tram line here like the or from the woodstock, come from right up at number 8 level there, and by aerial tram it was run down to the treatment plant. They and the Crown Company used a process, they called it the cyanide treatment. I believe the Karangahake, the Crown Company, was the first in the world to use it commercially. Cyanide has the ability to melt gold, and when the finely crushed ore come in contact with a cyanide solution, it melted and became part of that solution. That solution in turn was run through boxes with zinc shavings in them. And there we had the opposite. The zinc shavings attracted the cyanide back from the solution. And the zinc shavings and bullion become what we called slimes. The zinc was more or less melted with the effect of the gold, the bullion mixing with it. It become almost like very thin nugget or something like that. You called it slimes. That was eventually put through a furnace, and you had a gold bullion. Now that method of treatment was they were able to extract 90% of the gold, and Karangahake was booming once they got going. The Talisman, over 3 million ounces of gold, Crown, quite thousands of ounces. And really, they were the only 2 treatment plants that were left. And Karangahake depended on them for its labour. Almost everyone that lived here, every able-bodied man, worked either in the extraction plant or in the mines. And this carried on right through until about 1920. A lot of valuable ore was produced, and finally about in the teens, nearly up till about 1920, the latter part of the 1912 on, the good ore was running out, and finally about 1920 both those treatment plants closed down, and Karangahake really became a ghost town. It was a town of about 2,000, and once the mines closed, the miners left. Their homes were almost valueless. Nobody wanted them. They had worked their heart out to become, independent with their own home, but most of them walked away with nothing. The home, no trouble to buy a house for £50. That's the way it went. And it was about this time that I come to live in Karangahake as a boy. We had, my dad was a railway man. He had worked in at various parts of New Zealand, but he came here when I was a boy of about 10 or so, and he was really the last porter in charge. They went station master at that, although Karangahake had supported the station master in its boom days. When he came here, he was a porter in charge, and after a few years the station was closed down, and my dad had bought a small area, 50 acres on, and after a couple of years schooling in Paeroa, I carried on and helped him on the farm.
Could you, Mr. Cotter, could you show us where the station and the railway bridge are on that photograph,
Yes.
please?
Yes. Now, if you have a look at this map, you'll see there's the railway station, okay? And that railway line went through over that railway bridge into a tunnel and out on to Waihi. That was the Waihi, Paeroa Waihi line, and of course Waihi was quite a booming town when I was here, and it went on for many more years. There's the Crown treatment plant, the talisman showing in the background. That's where the ore come out of the mountain and was sent by aerial tram over to the treatment plant for the talisman. There's the old Karangahake school. And you know, something that shows up here very much is today, that is all shingle in the river. You'll notice that's all white silt. And that silt was from the tailings of the Victoria Battery at Waihi, the Golden Dawn at Awara, the Crown and Talisman at Karangahake. And there were some the Golden Cross at Waitakere. That would have all come down and helped to build up all this silt that you see has settled on top of the original shingle bed that the river would have had when back in the early days. I well remember when I come to Karangahake, I had lived at Kakahi. Now Kakahi was perhaps one of the best trout fishing areas you'd find. The Wanganui River had lots of fish, and just as a schoolboy I had no problem to catch fish. I caught about 50 trout in my last season at Kakahi. Come down to Karangahake hoping to be able to do a bit of fishing because we knew a river run past. I remember the first morning I got up after we arrived here. Our home was near the railway station. I went across the road and looked down the river. I says to my dad, "My goodness, that river's in flood and I can't remember any rain." Oh, he says, "That's the silt from the mines." And it was quite a disappointment because I'd really thought I'd be into the trout fishing again, but no, it didn't. They couldn't live in it. More, although the cyanide might have affected them, but I feel it was more the silt. They couldn't cope with it. Fish couldn't cope with the silt in them. Well, this went on and caused no end of trouble to the Awamutu and the Waihi River. Caused a lot of flooding. Stop banks had to be put up so that the river would keep within its course, and only a matter of time till the silt had gradually built up and they had to put another lot of rebuild the stop banks again. The There's such a lot of history tied up in this old place. When I was a boy, I had the opportunity to talk to old miners. Or they loved to talk about it. But, you know, young fellas, you know, it's all just, you're living another day and you weren't interested in that old history, and that's really why I like to pass on anything I know. Most of what they knew is gone with them. It was never even put down on paper, and there's a lot of history that would have been very good reading if you could get it all together today.
Of course, you created a little bit of history yourself, didn't you?
In mining?
By becoming associated with the Crown Battery.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, please?
In my time at mining, yes. Well, as I said, the big treatment plants closed down about 1920. But then again, about in the 30s, in the Depression days, there were a lot of people about trying to get work, and an attempt was made to revive the mining here. One company opened up the top part of the hill which had not been worked during the boom days. And they done very well. They didn't build a treatment plant when they first opened, and they used to cut the ore by truck out to Owara and treat it through the Golden Dawn. That was the Talisman Dubbo. They employed quite a gang of men and trucked their ore out there, and it was put through the Owara battery. They took samples of the ore as it went into the plant and paid out on the value of assay value was pretty close, and they paid out those that supplied them with ore. The Talisman Dubbo Company and others sent ore out and put it through that battery. There was also an old chap by the name of J.B. Morris. I was working on the farm for years, and I might tell you the farm, there wasn't much returns there because Dad and Mum had a family of half a dozen, and I just couldn't take any worthwhile pay from them. But when I did get the chance to start mining, and Dad had left the railway, and for a while he wasn't that well, but when he did, he took over and done the farming while I was. And I went and asked old J.B. Morris if there was, he was shoveling, old chap, he was in his 70s, and he was shoveling quartz into the crusher, and I thought, goodness me, that must be hard work for that old fellow. I went over, I said, Mr. Morris, is there any chance of me getting a job? And he looked at me, and he says, let me introduce you to a friend, and he passed me the shovel. And I had a job. Well, I worked for the old fellow for about 2 years, mostly in the mine, the old Crown mine. We were taking out ore that had been left by the other big company. And I worked for him on wages for a couple of years. And then he took me in partnership. There wasn't much returns. We got quite good ore at times. I've got a little bar here, see that? Mm-hmm. When we closed down, or after I'd been there something like 5 years or so, we run out of worthwhile ore, and he run up that little bar, or there was two of them. He kept one and give me the other one. It's about half gold, half silver, just a momentum, and that's what you were after. Anyway, after I'd worked up for old JB for a couple of years, we went in partnership. We worked hard. We had half a dozen men working for us at times, and we all often felt we'd be millionaires, but it didn't happen, and it just had to happen. Any time we got a surplus, we put it back in, trying to look for something better. And well, there come a time when I married. I got a young boy come along, and we couldn't do without wages. When we were working as a company, the wages men had to get their pay, and old Johnny and I got what was left, and sometimes it wasn't very much, so we had to turn it in.
So
and that was...
What year would you have started with Mr. Morris, roughly?
I think I'd be about 23. I would be 23. What year? I could... well, we married in 39, 41. I would have
about 35, 1935,
yeah,
36.
36 probably. I started for him.
And how much of the Crown buildings and that were you actually using?
Nothing. It was right away from the original Crown battery. It's a totally new building.
Did it have any association with the Crown at all then?
Well, only the ore.
Oh, the ore.
Only the ore would come out of the old Crown mine.
I see.
And everything else would be, I think he bought it through Judge or Price, the crushers, the ball mill, the wool-free table, all that stuff. It was about then, from the old days.
And where was that plant established?
That he built?
Yes.
I think about 35, 30...
Yeah. I mean, whereabouts? Where was it?
On the old, what is now the parking area, just below the confluence of the Waitafta and Crown and Onamuri. It was on that flat there where the parking area is now.
On the highway side of the river?
Yeah, yes, that's right.
On the east side of the river, as it were?
Yeah.
Right. And how did you get the ore?
We brought it down the tramway as it used to be brought down until we got to where the swing bridge is now. There used to be a traffic bridge over the river there, in the quite a good bridge, and a track used to come over, and we had a hopper that we tipped it in when we come down from the mine with it, tipped it into the hopper, and a truck would load it and take it over to the treatment plant on the where the picnic area is now.
The hopper would be on the west side of the river?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And how did you get the ore down? Was it with the tramway?
The same size trucks as the horses used to pull down. The only thing, when the horses were doing it, they'd pull about 5 trucks. They weren't hard to pull. There's a very slight grade, very slight, even grade, all from the mine down to the old Crown battery, all the way. It's almost level, but a full truck would push fairly easy, and going back up it'd be empty, of course.
And did you use horses?
No,
What,
we pushed one truck at a time.
by hand?
Yes, one truck by
Uh-huh.
hand or leg or whatever you like. They were when I thought it was the. I remember when I first got that job working for old Jack. That was the first thing I done. He had a bit of oil on hand up at the mine, and he gave me. I spent a day at the feeding some ore into and round the battery, and then I had a truck next morning to push up, and I quite remember passing up the gorge there with the native honeysuckle growing on the banks, and I stopped for a bit of a puff, and the smell of this honeysuckle, I'll never forget it. I thought I had the best job in the world. It was wonderful. I thought, oh, this will do me. But it just didn't happen that way. Honeys, no. In some ways, I would have loved to have got back into mining, but big difference in the price of gold then and what it is now. Unfortunately, the damage we done to the environment in the early days it was something you didn't look at later and felt you weren't very proud of that. Everything went into the river. All your tailings, any rubbish at all, even the people living along the roadsides, you just dumped everything in the river, and it didn't give mining a very good name.
Cool. How far was it from the mine to the hopper?
About half a mile.
Half a mile. Yeah. And was that a wooden track or a metal track?
Oh, a good steel rails.
Steel rails.
Not as wide as on the railway line, but there were steel rails, and a reasonably fit man had no trouble to push a truck up.
And how far from the tunnel or the mine portal was it to where you were getting the ore from?
Oh, now that varied. We were just bossing around, and we got it from anywhere where we thought it would be payable. We were getting a bit more than what they did in the per ounce for gold, and the big trouble was the equipment we had. We bored holes for blasting by hand steel. No way could you ever make, if you'd have thought it out, no way could you ever produce it at a decent, too slow, yeah.
Were you involved in drilling those holes?
Oh, yes, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Were you holding the bit or hitting it?
Oh, both ways, both ways, yes. Well, I done most of the hammer work because I was young. The older miners, they'd sit and hold the bit and risk getting a whack on the side of the head. That happened, not while I was there, but I knew a friend of mine that he was a very likeable sort of a chap, but even when we were sitting down having our crib, and that was lunch, you call that your crib, he'd nod off. He would. He just nod off to sleep for a while. And one day he was swinging the hammer for an old chap up the road here, and he went to sleep. And he hit him on the side of the jaw, and he had to go to Thames Hospital. Yeah. Oh, look, if you start telling stories about the old mining, what happened in the old mining days, of course they're all got a bit added. It's like catching fish. They get bigger and bigger every time you tell the story. Yeah.
What sort of explosive were you using?
Gelignite.
Gelignite.
Gelignite. All gelignite those days. And I never heard of an accident in my day with gelignite. We could go into the hardware shop and buy a packet of gelignite and caps and fuse. Nobody worried. Farmers bought it to make their roads, to split their timber. But today, you find it very hard to get hold of some gelignite. But that's just the way it is. Yeah.
So you learned how to handle the explosive?
Oh,
then,
yes.
And you fired your own shots, did you?
Yes, yeah. That was no trouble.
Yeah.
You didn't have to have any special license or anything to prospect or bore holes and fire shots. You do today. Perhaps they learn that we got away with a few things we were lucky. No.
And
the mines generally here, there were a lot of mines, a lot of men employed in the Karangahake area over a period of about 20 years, and there were 20 casualties. Conditions underground, not too good, always a chance of an accident, and the lighting, just a candle on a spider, we used to call them, a couple of candles on the wall, could have easily had accidents, but no. It was sad, an average of one a year. When you think of all the men employed, not too bad. They looked after one another though, and that was one of the, a mining community, whether it's Karangahake or Waihi or anything, miners stuck by one another, and I think partly because the way they worked, they had to look after one another, and it drew them close together. Yeah. Something special about old mining towns. Yeah. Yeah.
Gold or coal.
Yeah.
So you did most of the jobs around the crushing plant and the battery, did you?
I knew how to do them all, really, simply because it was a small plant, and of all the men that worked in the mine there, I was the one that would go down to the treatment plant and help old J.B. Morris when he wanted help. And in that way, I learned exactly how the whole process of extracting the gold. They had a school of mines here. In the big boom days, they would have closed about, the school of mines would have, in fact, that's it there, it just bit in there. That was the old school of mines in there, and people studied mining and treatment and all that, and they qualified, got, yes.
And were you ever involved in smelting the bullion at all?
I wasn't actually, old JB told me and showed me how to do everything, but only really while he done it. And I never bothered. I'd only be with him and he'd show me how to do it. But I never got to a stage where I could say, well, I was qualified to take over a treatment plant and do the job properly.
And what was bullion exactly?
Well, bullion is gold and silver. Yes.
And what percentages were you getting from the ore that you processed?
The crown went about 50-50. This little bar is about 50 gold, 50 silver. But sometimes now the talisman, I would say, was 12 of silver to 1 of gold. but they still had very valuable ore there. Silver wasn't worth very much then, 1/6 an ounce for silver. But we got 6 pounds for an ounce of gold. You'd get $600 for an ounce of gold. Big difference. Yeah.
What did you have in your battery to crush the ore? How did you crush it?
Big jaw crusher. We had a spalling hammer that we would break a very big piece of quartz into a size that would go into the mouth of the crusher, and that done the crushing till it was about like road metal after it come out of the crusher, and it was run up a belt, took it up into a bin where it was fed into a ball mill. Now that had steel balls. The mill, it was a big drum, rotating drum with steel balls in it, and the drum would keep rolling. It had fins inside it so that the balls kept going and were picked up and dropped, and eventually it crushed until the ore was fine enough to go through a screen. Now that screen would be a size so that it would, until it finer than sand, silt. It would go through onto a table which was vibrating with water running over it had slats on it, and the water running over the vibrating table would cause the lighter particles they'd go over the battens, but the concentrates which contained minerals, gold and silver, they wouldn't climb over those slats, and they'd move on down the table into a container. And those concentrates were put into a badan, which was like a big basin revolving, and it had quite a heavy, I forget what you called it. It was laying in the bottom so that it ground and ground.
Heavy weight.
And in that basin, or badan as we called it, was quicksilver, mercury. The mercury picks up the gold and silver, and you've got amalgam. That's a mixture of mercury, gold and silver. And that would be, at the end of the day, you'd squeeze it through a chamois leather, sort of a glove. And the quicksilver would get through that chamois leather, but the gold and silver would stay inside it. It wouldn't go through. Well, the quicksilver, you just use it again to come out, but there was some gold and silver, some mercury still left with the
amalgam,
with the bullion, you know, and you put that into a sealed container. It had to be sealed properly. It was like a pot, and it had a pipe coming out the top, and that pipe went down into a bucket of water. Now, when the heat, I didn't want a big heat. You could do it with a wood fire. The lump of bullion you had and quicksilver the quicksilver at a certain temperature would go vaporize. The gold and silver wouldn't, and the fumes would go up the pipe, down into the water, and go back to quicksilver. You mustn't let that get out into the air because it was toxic. But you then had a piece of what looked like a big piece of honeycomb, just like the old honeycomb lollies. Little holes all through it. You put that into your retort and smelted it and made it into bars. Yeah.
Oh. And what did you do with it then?
Took it to the bank, and they, being a liquid when it was put into the moulds, you had little moulds for it to be poured into, and it was poured in as a liquid. It looked like water. When it went into the moulds, there would be a little bit of slag, other rubbish other than gold and silver. You'd give that a tap, it would fall clear, and you had your little bar of bullion. And you took that to the bank, and they bored a tiny little hole right through it. And that would tell them how much gold was in the bar, how much silver, and they paid out on that. We never, in our plant, never ever refined it. The big companies will often refine it, so much gold, so much silver, but we sent it in as bullion.
And that bank, was that in Karangahake?
No, we took it into the bank in Paeroa, and they would very quickly find out how much gold and how much silver was in the bar.
And did you do that every day, or?
No. Wasn't worthwhile. We didn't got enough. Payday. When it was come payday or the day before, we'd take our bar in and put it through the bank.
Armed escort?
No, I remember my wife and I had a house just above the battery up on the hill by the school, and I've taken the bullion home quite often, and I used to put it up behind the chimney, just in case, but I never heard of anyone trying to get it down. Mind you, the big companies, they had to look after it, a lot of money. Ours was never worthwhile going to jail for, but those big companies had a lot of bars and that. The refinery for the Talisman Company, you'll see it on some maps, and you couldn't get into the refinery without you went through the house where the assayer and the chap you had to go through his house to get into the refinery. What come out then of those big pours was worth having. Yeah.
And when you and Mr. Morris stopped your operation down there, what happened to the plant?
Well, I know it was sold to pay. He was able to pay up all he owed. You're always got expenses when you're running a thing like that. You pay for cyanide, you pay for explosives and timber and all that. He sold it, or probably the same as when the big batteries closed. They had a big sell up, and there's farmers and all sorts would come. They had lovely big kauri timber. All lovely. If you had a sale today, it'd be worth the world. But it sold.
And it was all dismantled and taken away?
Dismantled and sold, yes. That happened to all of them. Except the Woodstock battery. Now, it had a different ending. Just before they sold out to the Crown, a big flood come down the river and took away part of the treatment plant that was near the river, and they'd had it right near the river so they could take advantage of the fall from the dam higher up. And shortly after that, the whole thing caught fire and the battery burned down. Like a lot of the houses in Karangahake when mining ceased. It was very common to have fires then until the insurance companies says no more, we won't insure any more houses in Karangahake. Yeah.
Were you the last to work the Crown mine then?
I'm fairly sure I went away after that down for about 5 years down on the plains. Unless somebody else spent some time in there, I would say yes, we were. Now that only amounted to the amount meant that you're only talking about the Crown mine. The Talisman mine has been prospected and efforts have been made to get it going again over the years. It's never got started. Even now there's people up there prospecting and still are. I know I passed them the other day. Still looking around to see if they can find a way of producing some ore. I understand if they do, they will take it right away and put it through a plant somewhere where it won't do damage. Now, if there's nowhere in Karangahake, it's too steep, nowhere to set up a place, a paddock to put tailings in. So it would have to be taken away as ore to somewhere. And so you could dump the tailings where it was suitable.
So there yet may be a resurgence of gold mining in Karangahake.
Yeah, well, you'd have to be careful there. There's a lot of people don't want to ever see that happen. Karangahake's a tourist attraction now. Very popular. Thousands of people visit here every year. And they really appreciate the beauty, the way it's come back, going back to native. The DOC people have spent a lot of time, a lot of money, making the old tram lines, the old water races, and access tracks. They've all been made into walkways. And it's now very popular for recreation, and I think we'd all like to see it used for recreation rather than for gold mining. I tell you, there'd be, if anyone opened up a gold mine and done any damage to the environment, it'd be quite a lot of...
A new era has dawned.
Yes.
Tourism.
And it's amazing. I can't help but go back over places I went when I was a boy. How nature is, even without help, nature's taken over again, and we have what was bare, cliff faces, places you'd never think a tree would grow, but it's coming back.
Right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Whereabouts was your father's farm, Mr. Cotter? Which road was that up?
This road goes up to where I took the farm off, and this road goes up to the old farm. It's called John Cotter Road. I don't know why they call it John Cotter Road, but
I've got a fair idea.
And that's where it is, just not far from here.
I see.
Yeah.
Right. And that was where you lived really for most of your life, I suppose, wasn't it?
Yes, other than 5 years when I was away truck driving.
Mm-hmm.
I've lived there.
Mm-hmm.
And my son after me. And now I've sold out a few years ago. He has some of the old farm, but mainly it was sold. And, well, I've heard it said before in this sort of country, the only way you ever make anything out of this country is when you sell it.
You proved that.
I proved it. I worked very hard, and most of it you couldn't get machines over, and weed infested gorse country, and that you're spending all you get. Yes, yeah.
Just looking back, you left school at the age of 14. You left the convent in Paeroa and came to work on the farm. Now that would have been in 1924.
No,
26, 1926, if my arithmetic's right.
Yeah.
Now, what was in Karangahake at that time, in 1926, in the way of commercial enterprises? Was there a general store?
Yes, there was a couple of stores at that time, but they weren't flourishing. They tried that hard to keep going profitably. I remember there was one store down what we call River Road, and I remember I used to carrying half a bag of sugar. I used to do a little bit of work for the lady that had the store. I was only a teenager, but she used to give me a little something for doing it. They tried hard to keep going, but there wasn't the Wallace supplies from Waihi, plus Wells the butcher, Leach the baker. They had a cart coming out from a horse and cart, and they would deliver. And any stores that were here were starved out that way. Why wouldn't you have it delivered to the door instead of having to go and get it from the store? No, it's a long time since. Now, the opportunity, well, everybody's got cars, they go into town shopping, but there's the tea rooms, winery. Things are getting going again. Karangahake is coming back. In that way, there's more at the school. The school roll here was right down to 16 at one time, and I know we had a meeting in Paeroa. They wanted to close the school, take the kiddies into Paeroa by bus. There's some old hands were very opposed to that, and the school stayed, and now they roll about 50 or more. So even that's come back. I don't think the school has been done up, is in very good order, and it's one of the real old type schools. I don't think they'll ever close Karangahake School. I don't think so.
Not without a fight, anyway.
There'll be a big fight, yes, yeah. Well, it becomes the centre of the community. I have been involved in it when it was right at slow level. I'd hate to see it close. It was our only, the old hall we had, one was burned down, another one was shifted to Waihi, and the only place we had to have a social or game of cards was in the school. And there was a time when, it was very important. We have a decent hall now. That was built in 1957. we wouldn't be without a hall, but it's a community centre, and when they have their prize giving, end of year social and all that, place is packed, yeah. We hold them down in the hall, you know. It means a lot to these outlying areas, farming areas too. There's a lot of opposition to closing schools. From a financial point of view, certainly you could take the pupils into Paeroa cheaper than you could run a school. But with the school going, there's a big link with the bigger community. Interest goes with the school. Yeah.
And this is the main street in Karangahake in 1910, about 12 years before Mr. John Cotter arrived to live in the town. And this is a photograph of the Tramway Hotel at Karangahake. Built in 1880, later destroyed by fire, it had gone before Mr. Cotter arrived on the scene. The Karangahake Gorge, about 1910, showing the road, and the pipeline to the Talisman mine. This is a geologist inspecting the workings of the old Talisman mine referred to by Mr. Cotter. One day it may reopen and the gold ore in there could continue to be processed. And this is the Crown Battery at Karangahake in its heyday, and it was of course the Crown Battery and its associated mine, which John Cotter and his partner Mr. Morris later took over and worked for about 5 or 6 years up until 1941, when they made the last pour of bullion in the Karangahake Gorge.
Thompson Road. That was the end of that road there. It was an Irish settlement, Paeroa, Paeroa. And I bought there, and I went and built there, and I carried on and built, and they teaching the guys at the rehab, you know, and all at Paeroa, all the state houses were built there, and they teach. So I got one guy. He came to me, he said, I got a job. He said, they tell me you want to build. I said, oh yeah. I didn't go for a loan. I said, yeah, I don't. Oh, you're not. He said, what did you say? Oh, he said, I've got a house job to do. He said, it's 4 and 3. He said, it's got the 4x3s and the 6x2s. He said, and he said, you can have those to take. I said, I'll take those, you see. Then the next lot of stuff I wanted was framing, but I had to go and get from the mill. They said, the guy who put it out, he said, I got some going through, I don't want it. I had to go to Hickson's and get it, green, and put it up and fillet it, and all this bloody work, you know, till it dried out. Then I did the concrete footing around the back and stepped it, you see. Then there's 2 guys that just they'd learned to trade bricklaying. They did the bricklaying. Another guy, then I knew a woman, she was friendly with the guys, the firm that used to make the tiles. They were the best tiles in those days out at Henderson way. So she got me there. So I was very lucky. I didn't have to borrow money on it. And time took 2 years. Time I finished, and I built the garage myself. Well, and another guy who put it up. because I'd got enough knowledge, you know, with type of work and that. And when they pulled up the tram tracks, I was right next door to the cemetery. I cut the bank away and they pulled up beautiful bluestone.
Oh, yeah.
I took over from Bitchamix and I took over 3 or 4 truckloads of that, sent it home. I put a wall up, you know, nice. So it came out very nice. So I started to make money then. And the guy lived after me was called Percy McCabe. He was a bookmaker. And he had 3 sections, 2 sections, and he had a house built there, big brick house. Silliest thing I ever did when I said, he wanted to sell it. I said, I'll buy it, Percy. I said, I've got enough money now. I bought it. And I was still working for Bitchman way out in the country. I thought, Christ, I don't know how I'm going to... I moved into and let my house that I'd built, you see. And I thought, oh, way out in the way back in the bush, and some sheep there. I said to the guy, can I have a couple of your sheep? He gave me 2 sheep, you see. I took those home, put the wire fence up right around the bottom, had the sheep there. And so I thought, oh, I'll sell this one. And they were just opening up Pakuranga then, Lytton's estate. And he came and looked at me, he said, I'll get you 25,000 if you're over in Pakuranga. He said, I can only get you 22,000. You know, I sold that market for 22,000. And I sold the other one later. Then I bought one at the Crest in Pakuranga, they're building then. And sold that one, I think, about 35. And that I pay about this. Then the one I bought at Half Moon Bay, they were just developing that. And so bought that one at Half Moon Bay. Christ, and it was a beautiful home. A builder built it himself and lived there, and bloody beautiful. Only got 50,000 when they sold it, you know, there. And Christ, I want about 250,000 for this bloody... It's awful to think, you know, 50,000. He said, if you... That's all you can get you. Go on, I said, right. So we bought one in... we bought one in Cadicat, Heron Crescent, you know Heron Crescent? Right on the corner there next door to where Sailor Wildford used to live. Just that one that had a stone wall around the front. And I put the fence up around it. So I sold that bugger all for that. And to think, you know, how... But while I'd had that one, I bought this one here, you know, for just... Oh no, I bought this one while I was in Auckland just for... But while I was down there, Anne said, why don't we buy that one? I bought it, but she didn't like it. I bought that figure there. So...
What actually decided you on coming to Athenry?
I don't know, I just thought it was... or see, the woman that... You know the story about this house, where I live. Keith Birchall built it. He had it built by Thomas and Alfords in Auckland. Keith Birchall, he had that section. And he had the house where this house is now. Well, he sold it to Trevor, when he built his place, he sold it to Trevor Christini.
Oh, yeah.
And Trevor, you know, Hannah Christini. Well, her mother turned around and married some Maori guy, something, and Heather told it to her mother, but they shifted. They lived in that batch, see, because Keith and them had the batch up there, and so when Heather lived in, they had the batch where the house is. Well, when Rennie came, she had the batch put there, and they built that house. So that's how I thought to come in. I thought, oh, I'll come up, I'll buy it, you see. So, but I've had a cross lease years back, you see. But that, so Heather's mother had it. Did you know Rennie?
No.
She played bold, but she bought a unit now in Cadicat.
Oh, yeah.
Down there. Yeah. But old Max Palmer had that one built that I was living in.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Max is dead and gone now. All those guys. Sailor Walford, he used to live next door. It was quite nice island, but Anne didn't like Cadicat. But so I've got a bugger-eyed mucking around, but still I quite enjoy it. But now, with Anne, I don't even wash a dish or touch a dish. I said, Sheila say to me, I thought I got a big farm here outside. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Oh well, that brings us up to date pretty well, thanks Mick. And we've got some of your mining days down there, which is good, which is what they wanted.
Yeah, well, that's good then.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.